and how God had given his all for his covenant people, yet they continually turned against him. They let him down. You know, how many times have we let God down and we've disappointed him? Today we begin our study, like I said, in Hosea. To me, that's quite an unusual book in the Old Testament. I think it's probably been one of the most discussed, one of the most disputed. Uh, and I think we look at the lesson today. I think people's imaginations fly, uh, and uh, and I guess we all have an opinion, whether it's right or not. You know, like the guy said, you can have your opinion, just be wrong. But just yeah, you got a right to be wrong. But what 64? Okay. But it's like I said, quite an unusual book. Now Hosea is a writer of the book, but you know little is known about him. And probably was a native of the northern kingdom of Israel. And this would make him and Jonah the only writing prophets of the northern kingdom. Now, Amos was a prophet to the northern kingdom, but I think he was a native of Judah. We went to walk through the Bible one time, and one way to remember the prophets of Israel is Hosea and Amos. So, but although he addressed both Israel and Judah, he identified the king of Israel as our king. Now, the theme of Hosea is God's loyal love for his covenant people, Israel, in spite of their idolatry. Thus, Hosea had been called the apostle of love of the Old Testament. Some scholars have doubted the authenticity of the marriage of Hosea to Gomer as symbolic, but much of the impact would be lost if not literal. And we'll get a little further into that as we get into the lesson. But some say, oh, that was just symbolic. But I don't, well, I don't accept it. But we'll look a little further into that as we get into the lesson. But let's someone read now Hosea 1, verses 2 through 7. Let me get Yep. You know, the Lord's first words to Hosea at the beginning of his prophetic ministry was shocking, really. Go take you a wife of harlotry. That's the New King James, prostitute. Um, some say, and I don't think there's anything in the Bible supports that. Some say that she didn't turn to adultery or prostitution until after she married. Uh, I don't think the Bible doesn't. I don't think it supports that. She was a wife of harlotry. I mean, she was a prostitute. I mean, or whatever, or before they married. And you know, this is we can say going. I think it's in Leviticus. God forbids someone to marry a prostitute. So this kind of goes contrary to God's command. And some say, and I think some say that's what they say. Well, that's the reason. It's just it's not true. I mean, it's just but I think the scripture supports that it is. But they've suggested, you know, the Bible students have suggested a variety of interpretations to explain this command. The best interpretation that best fits the message in the context of this passage suggests that after receiving God's instructions to go and marry an already immoral woman, Hosea took Gomer to be his wife. Just now you talk about, I put yourself, put yourself in that place. I said, are you kidding, God? I mean, like I said, you got to be kidding, God. For me to go marry an immoral woman, uh, just as the Lord had bound himself in his covenant of marriage, this act would be the foundation of Hosea's message to Israel, and especially qualify him to deliver his message. As if the first part of the Lord's command to Hosea was not difficult enough, the Lord also told Hosea that he was to have children of harlotry. Now, some would think, and I was thinking about this, that she may have already had children. It's possible. I mean, it doesn't, to me, that's not the essence of the message. But it says, when you read that, yeah. Well, it's, if you want to read into that, like I said, marry children that have children of harlotry. In other words, she may have already had children. We don't know. That's not the significance of the. But this could suggest, like you said, she had already children from other men. Whether this was the case, Hosea's children bore the stigma of promiscuity because of their mother. The children would become essential parts of God's object lesson to Israel. I have you have a kind of feel for the children, uh, and what they went through growing up. Hosea's children would be signs to the nation. God gave shocking instructions to Hosea so that he and his family might serve as a living object lesson of what God was experiencing in Israel. The land has committed great harlotry by not following the Lord. They had just more or less Israel had reached bottom, so to speak. They had turned their back against God. Uh, they began to worship idols and just whatever, you name it. But Hosea obeyed the Lord and took Gomer and the daughter of Diblaim to be his wife. Now, one might think that the only reason naming Diblaim as her father would be to verify this was not a made-up story. She had an actual husband, a father, and named it. I think that maybe this was the reason to show that this was not a made-up story. There were real people and real events. As pointed out earlier, this was not a made-up story or a fairy tale. Now, I'm thinking, what kind of fairy tale would you call it? Usually all have a good ending. But beyond this, we know nothing about Gomer except what the text reveals about her in chapters 1 through 3. Now, some Bible students have suggested she was a typical prostitute. Now, what that really means, I don't know, but we can only speculate whether she was a typical prostitute or not. There are many ways, and I was thinking about this. There's many ways a person can prostitute themselves. I was watching one of my Western reruns the other day, and it was about in part of the story. Well, it was about this woman who desired to marry this wealthy man, and she didn't care about his shady character, only that he could provide her with the luxury she desired. Didn't matter that she didn't love him. So in a way, you look at, she was prostituting herself. And we see that even today that there's more than one way, like I said, that a person can prostitute themselves. They sell themselves out, sell their soul to the devil. But maybe a friend. Well, took the wrong one. Here we go. But anyway, that she didn't care. But it all ended well because all the westerns, they're going to end well. But she finally came to her senses or saw the light. But Gomer could have been a temple prostitute. Could have been. We don't know. That was prevalent there in that time. That some of the worshipers of Baal and false gods, they had the temple prostitutes. But just guessing, I don't think what we used to call a streetwalker. She may have been that too. That's a typical prostitute. But the point is, no matter what kind of prostitute she was, she prostituted herself, nevertheless. Verse 3 indicates Gomer conceived and bore Hosea a son. Now the Lord told Hosea to name his son Jezreel. Jezreel is a valley in a town within that valley. It's located between the mountains of Galilee and Samaria. Its name means, may God make fertile, signifying God's bountiful blessings of produce that came from that region. I've heard some say even today, you could fly over that area there and it's green. It's a fertile land. Some of Israel in the east, Mideast is desert. I've talked to people that's lived in that area or worked there, and they said you can fly. You can tell when you reach the borders of Israel because a lot of it is green. But Israel had turned to fertility cults and had forgotten that it was the Lord, not their false gods, who had blessed them with all that they had. The region had reportedly been a place of bloodshed in Israel's history. The judge Deborah and Gideon fought battles there. Saul and his sons prepared for the battle against the Philistines that led to their deaths in the Jezreel Valley. Jezreel was the home of Naboth, against whom Jezebel drummed up false accusations so she could give his vineyard to her husband Ahab. We know what happened to her, don't we? She was thrown from a window and run over and eaten by the dogs. That's, can you picture that? I mean, that's bad. But we know what happened, like I said, and many more significant events that we really don't have time to cover them all, but there was a lot of significant events that happened in that valley of Jezreel. But therefore, Hosea's son, Jezreel, represented the judgment that would come upon the kingdom of Israel in general and specifically upon the kingdom of the house of Israel. Breaking of Israel's bow meant Israel would not be able to defend itself. In either case, the name of Hosea's son served to prophesy that the fall of Jehu's dynasty and the demise of the nation of Israel would both happen within the vicinity of the Jezreel Valley. When Gomer conceived the second time, she bore a daughter, and the Lord instructed Hosea to name her Laruhamah, meaning not pitied or no mercy. Can you imagine how much she was teased or when growing up? Gosh, your name means no pity, not to be pitied. What was the message of the people of Israel? God will show you no mercy. If the people had thought Hosea had rejected his child, he would answer, I have not rejected my daughter, but God would show mercy to Israel no more. He will take you away into captivity. You know how many times that we, maybe a parent or mother said, well, if you don't do this, this is going to, and it comes to fruition. You say, oh, that ain't going to happen. And it winds up doing that. Of course, we may get, as we got older, when our parents got smart, so, well, he knew what he was talking about. And it's, we see it all through life, that we have warning signs. We get out on the highway, you have warning signs. And that's what's it for? To protect you, and especially the ones around you. I've had people, and y'all have too, just just come flying around you, not paying any attention to signs or anything. And I kind of tell them, well, I said, I'm going to slow down because they're on their way to a wreck. And just like I was telling the other day, well, when we came up for men's work day yesterday, I was sitting there at the light, there, big divide in the highway, and had the green light. And I saw this guy coming, pulling a trailer, and I said, he's not going to stop. And he went right on through that light. Well, if I hadn't been watching, and like I said, well, those saying, I was in the right, dead right. Yeah. And, I could have said, well, I could have pulled right out there and said, well, I was in the right, but I may not live to talk about it. But anyway, we see warnings all around us, signs of warning that it's for our good and protect us. But she named her Laruhamah, like I said, meaning not pitied or no mercy. But but some believe, and here we go again, with some believe and assume that Laruhamah was not Hosea's child, but she was conceived as a result of adultery. Some compare verse 6 with verse 3, and it says, verse 6 says, and she conceived again. Verse 3 says, so he went and took Gomer. There's no mention of Hosea is being the father, you might say, of the second child. And again, this is some more assuming. So no matter, whether this was Hosea's child or not, Israel's time was up. God would show no pity or mercy toward the nation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No pity. And like I said, we don't know, and it could have been that she was Gomer was unfaithful at this time. She was guilty of adultery, and like I said, but this is really, and I think we looked at the third son. It's probably a little more evidence, or the third child, that maybe it wasn't Hosea's child. But but no matter, Israel's time was up. God would show no pity or mercy toward the nation. I've mentioned before several times. We wonder when God looks down on us and says, "I've had enough." It could be coming near. It could be 100 years from now. We don't know. What is 1,000 years is as a day, and so we don't know. That's God's business. Whether when He decides to take us out of this mess, so to speak. But I think we're all ready. And even though the northern kingdom of Israel was Hosea's main audience, he could not neglect the southern kingdom. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. Did this mean Judah would not have to deal with the Assyrian attack? No. What it means is that while Israel would fall and be dispersed into Assyrian exile, the Lord would preserve Judah in their land, with the exception of, would not preserve Judah in their land. With the exception of Jerusalem. Judah was invaded in 401 BC. The city was not saved by military might, but by the divine intervention. It says that in the scripture that Chris just read, it's not going to be saved by the bow, or not by chariots, or not by military might. Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah cried out to the Lord to deliver them. Remember the story? I think this is one of the great miracles. The angel of the Lord, remember, went into the midst of the Assyrian camp and annihilated them, killing 180,000. Gosh, just picture that. I mean, they wake up the next morning, the king of Assyria there, and all these people, they're dead. He picks up what's left and he heads out of there. Probably thinking, well, I don't want to be next. But why did God show compassion on Judah and not on Israel? Israel had reached the point of no return. Like I said, that becomes, to me, it's a little scary when you look at us today. Have we reached the point of no return? I mean, you look at what's going on, what's in our schools. They're teaching transvestite, teaching that that's normal, and even doing in children, little children, performing surgery on them. It's horrible. And I'm just thinking, I hope I'm not. I'm glad I'm not one of them that's going to be standing before God. And they've taken the authority out of the parents. And it's just in the military. Look, the military now, it's just they're more concerned about teaching woke and all this than they are. The military, that's supposed to be the main thing, is teach you to fight. and and that's and to win. But yes, yes, yeah, psychologist, yeah, major, yes, and workplace. Well, anyway, I won't get onto that. Into that. What? Yeah, right. But it's our military, in other words, is just being desecrated. I mean, it's just, and they talk about that the volunteer is there. I forget how many hundreds of thousands that they're uh, well, they're behind. I mean, they're not meeting their quotas and everything. Uh, and and can't they figure it out? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But really, why would someone want to join now? The way things are. And like I said, they're even talking about bringing back the draft. Uh, and so, but we don't. Like I said, it's just where are we headed? Is God about to say I've had enough? But not just here. It's worldwide. It's all over the world. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. But while Judah was ungodly, kings, while Judah had ungodly kings, they also had some godly kings, such as Hezekiah. You look at the northern kingdom of Israel, not one king was godly, not one followed the leadership of God. Evidently, Judah would face their demise eventually. We know when they were taken by King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, they defeated them, took them into captivity. There for 70 years. Someone read now verses 8 and 9. Mm. Again, was the third child Hosea's? Question. If he was not Hosea's, Gomer was again guilty of adultery. In their culture, typically they said that the child was 3 years old before they weaned the child, so it was somewhere 3 or more years later after uh, Gomer had the third child. Like at the birth of Hosea's previous children, the Lord spoke to him, told him to name his son Loami, which means not my people. Now that would make one to think that this wasn't Hosea's child. Again, all can do is assume. Like I said, this has been, the more I read this, and this has been a very debated book. A lot of assumptions, and but this would make you think when it says that his name means not my people. This could imply the child was not Hosea's. But for you are not my people, and I am not your God, reflects and reverses the language of God's covenant with Israel. I will take you for my people, and I will be your God, in Exodus 6:7. In other words, that reverse. They turned away from God made the covenant with Israel. I will take you for my people, and I will be your God. And they just ignored it, so to speak. To think about what all they've been through from the time when they were in slavery in Egypt. God rescued them from that. Bo was with them the whole time they were in the wilderness. With them when they went into Canaan and took the land. And just you can just say one thing after another. And that's what they're saying, how soon we forget. We look at, we was talking the other day, I think there was on TV about 9/11. Most churches were full, but how soon we forget. And I've mentioned it too when the movie The Passion. People they said, "Oh, get ready, people are going to be in church." Didn't even happen. Uh, So, like I said, we soon forget. Um, we things can happen, like in our life, and then everything works out okay, and how soon we forget. Uh, I'm reminded of, and I've shared that before. I went through a spell when I was a kid, not coming straight home from school, and of course I knew what was coming when I got home. Got a whipping. Well, how soon we forget? The next day I did the same thing. And like I told something, by the time I outgrew that or got out of it, by the time I was coming home, I'd be near the house. I was already crying because I knew I was going to get a spanking. And but how soon we forget. And it was more fun to play with a friend than to come straight home. And even though I had to pay the consequences, well, it's the same with Israel. It's more fun for them to disobey God, even though they're going to have to pay the consequences. But let's look now at verse in Hosea 3, verses 1 through 5. Someone read that, please.
Then the Lord said to me, Go again, show love to a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, just as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and 9 bushels of barley. And I said to her, You are to live with me many days. You must not be promiscuous or belong to any man, and I will act the same way toward you. For the Israelites must live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, and without ephod or household idols. Afterward, the people of Israel return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come with awe to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days.
The Lord spoke to Hosea again. Hosea's love was to be patterned after God's love. A love that is given to those who do not deserve to be loved. That's, we've heard, and I think there's instances, I'll be honest, I think there's instances, there's some that we in our life, we had to learn to love. I think Hosea was there. He had to learn to love Gomer. And I'm sure it was tough. And we look at, in fact, David Jeremiah's, not David Jeremiah, but Robert Jeffrey's sermon today was on marriage and on a divorce and adultery. And, Hosea had every right in the world to say, I'm done. I'm through with you. And that's the adultery, Christ speaks of it. That's it doesn't say you have to, but that's one of the reasons for divorce is adultery, unfaithfulness. And like I said, Hosea, I think we'd have said, "Oh, Hosea, I'd do it," and say, "I'd be done with her." But like I said, he brought out today. He said that you have the unfaithfulness was a grounds for divorce, but that don't mean you have to. Uh, I've known of people that they've worked it out, and I think God blesses them for that. He strengthens them. But note that Hosea did not call the woman by name, which have led some Bible students to conclude this was a different woman. Well, I don't go with that either. This was the same woman. It was Gomer. If it were not Gomer, it would not fit the message God intended to demonstrate in the life of Hosea and his family. It only makes sense if the woman in adultery was Hosea's own wife. Gomer, the promiscuous, had become Gomer, the adulteress. Promiscuous prior to being married, adulteress after marriage. Now, only a married, of course, this I think is a play on words here, but the writer said only a married person can be an adulterer. If those involved are not married, it would be called fornication. I mean, that's like a play on words, really. But either way, it's sin. That's the bottom line. It's sin. The digression in Gomer's relationship to Hosea mirrored Israel's relationship to the Lord. A people who once were promiscuous before this covenant have become adulterers after having entered into a covenant with the Lord. They observed consuming raisin cake. I can't say it. They consumed raisin cakes, which are part of special ceremonies, and possibly was an aphrodisiac. They turned what? Pagan worship. Yes, it was pagan worship. They turned to other gods and loved their flagons of wine. Now, what's flagons? I was going to look that up. I guess just, yeah, right, a big cup of wine. In other words, they were gluttonous, really, in drinking their wine. But Gomer had sunk so low, evidently, she had sold herself to another. We can assume her owner was selling her to others. The word today, he was pimping her. That sounds kind of harsh, but it's what he was doing. But I think she had got to the point she was no longer any value to her owner, and he put her on the auction block. What God commanded Joseph to go buy her back. Gosh. Hosea then bought her for a price equal to 30 pieces of silver, the price of a common slave. I mean, she had hit what? Yeah, 30 pieces of silver. Isn't that strange? There's another mention in the Bible of 30 pieces of silver, isn't it? Yes. But she had hit rock bottom. Hosea took Gomer and instructed her that she live with him in total abstinence of sexual relations with any man, including Hosea. So there'd be a time of abstinence that they would live together. And the goal of Hosea was a resumption of his covenant relationship with marriage. Verses 4 through 5 explain the analogy of Hosea's marriage as it reflects what God would do with Israel. For a time, Israel would be without a king, a priesthood, or any idols. Then, when their time of probation came to completion, Israel would return and seek the Lord. The promise anticipated the return of the Davidic kingship, which would be the Lord Jesus Christ. The restoration of the people would be complete in the person and work of Jesus Christ. In other words, it hadn't happened yet. When Christ returns, this will be complete. There will be a return to him by the nation of Israel. We got several minutes here. If we got any comments? I mean, no. Yes. Yeah. Right. Well, and like I said, by looking at this, of course, I've read this several times before, but by looking at this lesson, it makes you think, well, how many different people are looking, well, this means this. I think it's one of the most discussed or Bibles in the Old Testament as far as, like some say, well, it wasn't real. It was just a fairy tale. That's not true. Yes. Right. Sure. Debated. Yeah, that's the word I was trying to come up with. One of the most debated. Yes. And I would say go back and read chapter 2. I think it's important. It leads you into the rest of the book, the rest of the chapter. And we go on, we go later on, and instead of the hedge of thorns that was put around, he was still having problems with her, I think. keeping the reins on her, so to speak. And it was. I think we can probably sympathize with Hosea, but he followed God's command, and that's the key. He followed God's command. He not always easy, and we never see where Hosea questioned him. God, he did what God demanded. Like I said, it's not always easy. And sometimes we make, question God. God, is this what you really mean? You really want me to do this? Like Job? I mean, not Job, but Jonah? He had a better idea. And God, you need some help in this. And God, well, I'll take her, but there's going to be some conditions. And we even see that today. There'll be marital partners that they may be having problems, maybe separated, and one of them or both of them say, "Well, I'll take you back, but there's going to be some conditions." and God took us unconditionally. There was no conditions attached to us when we came to Christ. We just as I am, the song. What? Yes, all of us. Glad He let us in, unconditional, and that's really a picture there too of Hosea. He took Gomer unconditionally. Uh, didn't consider her past, didn't consider her present, and but followed God's command. Any other comments? No. Sure. Right. No. Well, we look at. Hmm. Yeah. Even look at Paul. He was something else. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it's all through His Word that He's going to forgive. Like I said, look at the nation of Israel. How many times, how many second chances He gave them? How many chances does He give us? Over and over and over. Hmm. And it's we have a just God, but we also have a loving God, and He's just. And there's times we pay the consequences for our sins, but it doesn't mean He doesn't love us. And it doesn't mean, like I said, there's nothing in Hosea that says that he didn't love Gomer. He loved her just as God loved Israel, and wanted to see them return back to Him, but they'd come to their end. There was and God. Yeah, yeah, and like I said, they will eventually return, but it'll be through Jesus Christ, and it'll be His when He returns, and so that's how many thousand years. Been a while, and but we can look at Israel, and it's a picture of us too, and or it can be a picture, and how he dealt with that nation, how He's still dealing with that nation. Some say, well, like I said, the church is Israel, the new Israel now. No, God is still dealing with Israel. I've said, and I hope I never come to this point, or we have to. I said, if there's a time our nation ever turns against Israel, I'm going with Israel. But I hope, pray it never comes to that. Um, but yeah, sure, yes, yes. Mm. And you mentioned that general. It was Diane was his name. The 6 Day War. Yeah, yeah. You said you couldn't think. Yeah, I can't say his first name, but Diane. He was the general. That. Yeah, right. Yeah, I heard after that happened, there's no way Israel could defeat Egypt. And like I said, they defeated them in 6 days. And I heard someone say, and that's when, he was our Secretary of State then, but Defense. Anyway, they said we need to make, I can't remember it or not, but anyway, they said our United States needs to make a deal with Israel that we'll give them X number of fighter jets. We'll give them X number of tanks and military equipment and all this. And what was his name? Anyway, plus the Secretary of Defense for Diane. Yeah, McNamara. Yeah, I think it was McNamara. Yeah, yeah. We'll make all this stuff. We'll give all this to Israel if they'll just give us Diane. Yeah, and I think too. I can't think of her name too. It was Prime Minister Golda Meir. Yes, yeah, she was something too. But any other comments? Yeah. Yeah. We always thought that was something, all that deal we'd make with Israel just to get General Diane. Any other comments? JC,